Hello and welcome to Radical World Podcast. My name is Jose Leal. I'm one of the two co-founders of Radical World. Matt Perez is not here today. He's been under the weather, feeling ill for some time now. But we are going to have a great conversation with Adrian. Adrian Roman is someone I've met recently. It's been maybe a month that we've had a couple of conversations. So happens that he's out in Somerville, Mass, where I live. So we've had a bit of experience talking a little bit about the fact that I know the environment, sort of what that area feels like. And now we're going to have a conversation about cultivating cooperative cultures and understanding what it means to be cooperative, understanding how to cultivate cooperation, and that unique culture of co-ops. Adrian, welcome.
Thank you. Good to see you again.
Yeah, it's nice to see you again. I enjoyed our conversations, and I'm hoping that this is just as smooth as those conversations were in a live format. So I always start by trying to figure out, like, are you new to this thing? Like, where did this energy for co-ops come from?
Yeah. I'll share a little bit of my path into cooperatives. Um, I wouldn't say new in some ways, and in other ways I would say new. Um, but yeah, I'll start after college. In college, I was studying philosophy and business, and I remember talking to my philosophy professor and telling him, like, listen, I don't think I can do this business as usual, like work to pay rent, to work to pay rent. And I had just come from a conference in California where this Buddhist center had like work study programs where you could live there and work there. And so he pointed me in that direction, and that's where I ended up going right after college. I was like, California, sure. And so yeah, I ended up in the Nigma Centers in Berkeley, California, and I worked there full time, studied with them full time, and lived there. Um, it
Cooperative
was
living?
intentional. Yes, yeah, it's a intentional community. Everyone who lived there worked there and studied there, so it was very like um, it was very intimate. They called it a pressure cooker often,
I was going to
and
say intense.
yes, it was intense, but also it had this level of magic because everybody was so close that I would often like there were some interesting things that happened because we were in such close community. Like seeing each other at the perfect moment in this big city, really like and having similar things happen in our lives at the same time. Um, so I lived there. That's when I first got in touch with like, what is it like to live in a community like this? And it was so different than I had experienced in my life, even that I had thought existed. Like it
Right.
wasn't in my education that this existed. So that really kind of opened my eyes to collective living and collective liberation, right? This was a Buddhist center. It was very focused on how to recognize what patterns you're living within. So cooperatives, after I was there for some time, they asked me to develop a program to bring in more folks. And so in developing it, I wanted it to be decentralized. That was kind of like I was like, look, we can't be telling people what to do, more like they see what they want to do through this mission and like we help them do it. I felt like that would work. And that's what we did. And it worked very well for like 2 or 3 years. We really had a strong community, very passionate. It was so like in sync, you know. And this happened in 2020 during like the uprisings and awareness of racism and COVID. And so we got more active in the community in that way too,
Hmm.
as a
Hmm.
Buddhist center. And that's when the the directors of the center were like, actually, you're not that decentralized. Like, you're actually not allowed to do that. And so it kind of uh, dissolved our community, our petri dish of a community. And then that's when I got into cooperatives. That's when I was like, this can't happen again. That was really messed up. And we need real ownership. Like, what exists out there that gives you real ownership? And
That
that's when I started coming in.
that's perfect because the reason Radical started was because Matt and I came actually from two different backgrounds. Both of us were entrepreneurs, but Matt had actually post his corporate work. He started a company with a partner, Roberto, and that company, they from the beginning they started with a self-management model that they sort of cobbled together from a whole bunch of different ideas, including Ricardo Semler's book that his son had given to them and said, "You guys should take a look at this." And
Mhm.
so as they were starting this company, they started seeing these ideas, much like you said, they didn't know it existed. They had this sense that something
Mhm.
could be different, but they didn't know what could be different about it. So they built an organization, when I think it was 300-400 people by the time they sold it, that was self-managed. But
Mhm.
what Matt realized, much like what you just described, was that he and his partner were the majority owners. Yes, they had distributed some ownership across to everyone else as well. But when it came to making decisions about selling and selling for how much and doing the negotiations and all that, guess who? It was
Yeah.
them. And the guys, the team didn't even know that these
Mm.
negotiations were going on because they had to do an NDA with the potential buyers.
Yeah. There's as decentralized as you make it, there's something really powerful about knowing that at the end of the day, you are equal owner. And so it does something to for your, real power, but also like your psyche. It's like, hey, at
Mm-hmm.
the end of the day, like I can say what I need to. I can change what I need to because this is me.
Yeah.
And so it's important. It's an important element of the business.
And for us, we'd been working in the self managed space. And it was when I took Matt to the California Co op conference that we walked out going, it's both. In our view, self management is was very important because many organizations, ownership aside, including co-ops, are still have a hierarchy,
Yeah.
right? And so the recognition for us was, wait a minute, you've got co-ops which have a great ethos. It's beautiful.
Mhm.
We love it. And you look inside and you realize that you still have all of that tension that comes from the traditional model of executive directors and general managers and so on and so forth, and voting for them and all of that kind of model, and that
Mhm.
dysfunction that creates. When you look at Mondragon, you still see the owners, the co-owners, going on strike
Yeah.
against management, which is also co-owners. So there's a
Mm.
dysfunction in how the organization is led, but the ownership was right. And we're like, what if we put these two things together? What if we put what we wound up calling co-management and co-ownership into the same thing, what we now call a radical company?
Yeah.
And so the idea is that though co-ops have been around forever, they haven't really taken off. And
Mm.
so our sense is, what if we're primed for a new era for co-ops? What if co-ops are actually ready with today's technology, today's know-how, the emergence of self-management brought together into co-ownership, co-management? Like, what if this is the time for that to happen? And that's really sort of the conversation we want to have with the
Mhm.
co-op community, with the self-management community. What if these two things really belong together? And we create a new way of running organizations that provide both for the co-ownership and the co-management, and
Yeah.
in exploring that whole thing together.
Yeah. No, I love that. I'm excited to learn more about y'all's work together. And what this brings to mind for me is like the internal structures of co-ops, like you're speaking about, but also co-ops engagement with the external world,
Yes,
right? Like, what's co-op role in social justice, right? Aside from it being social justice on its own, like, what does it mean for solidarity economy? What does it mean for mutual aid, especially in our time now? Like, how can co-ops prepare the way to be supported if other systems fail, like we've seen? They're already failing, but like if they fall, what do co-ops do then? And
yeah,
so I'm interested in that too. And from the internal part that you're saying, what comes to mind for me is like I was working as a co-op organizer before I was a co-owner. And there was a layer of separation for me as the technical assistance provider that I felt. There was a way where I couldn't really engage. But once I became a co-owner, I met that edge. I see this comment coming in. But let me
yeah,
finish this
yeah,
thought. See. And so I feel like once becoming a co-owner, I started meeting that edge of like how much does my mind actually want to lean on something? Like what does confidence mean? How can I fill out the space of being owner, having ownership of my life? Like that's a big leap.
it's huge.
And so I think becoming a co-owner, less so about business and more so about personal development. It's like, how can we be agents of our own life and be responsible for how we act in this world? And I think that leap in terms of co-management and stuff, like that's an important thing to look at, right? In
Huge.
addition to the structures.
And and
Yeah.
and I like to think of it, and yeah, I'd like to comment on Sierra's comment, but um, before commenting on that, I just want to say that I think, as you point out, that you said earlier about decentralized, right? You were looking for a decentralized way of doing things. And we have to decentralize the whole thing, because having any part of it decentralized keeps the whole cycle of domination going,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Even when we think, oh, we voted for the right person to be in the right role to tell us what to do, then we're still, voting is not a perfect medium by any
Yeah.
stretch of the imagination. And once people become in control, they use power of control. That's humanity. That's just the way it is.
Natural. I decentralizing every part of the system, getting real meta, like from my Buddhist lens, is like you even have to decentralize your view, right? Like we're
Exactly.
I-centered, like I'm doing this, and so how do you decentralize how we view the world is
Right.
another,
Yeah.
and that has to do with cultivating cooperative cultures. That's something I'm thinking about a lot. It's like the structures are not exactly enough, and so what does it mean to do the inner work? Um, yeah,
And to
let's
get,
look at that.
yeah,
That.
to Sierra's comment, the, what we've seen is that dysfunction emerges in organizations primarily from two things, right? The structure itself that imposes on people, causing them to respond to that imposition,
Hmm.
right? And then the imposition of individuals,
Mm,
where someone has been told that they have the power to impose on you. And that's where conflict comes from.
mm,
That when we remove the structures, ownership, hierarchy, so on and so forth, that with it comes a whole bunch of questions around how do we do this? To your point, Adrian, like I've been thinking about I have to defend myself from the powers, right? It's me as an employee and the boss telling me what to do, right? And or me climbing the ladder, right? All of that stuff, right? And so I have to fight to climb the ladder. I have to fight to protect myself from the boss. I have to fight to deal with all of these things. And that mindset is a mindset that needs to be clear, to your point, and a
mm,
new perspective to emerge. And when we do that, when we start that process of changing that perspective, it's one of the reasons why I don't like calling co-ops worker-owned co-ops,
mm, mm, mm.
because the perspective is I'm a worker, i.e., I'm here to work. I'm not an owner. It's not a co-owned co-op.
Mm.
Like that mindset right away, right?
Yeah,
And as a worker, I'm I'm already imposed on,
yeah,
right?
yeah. I think the worker own. I hear what you're saying, and I think it came from like employee owned co-ops, and they were like, hold up, not everybody's an employee with these LLC and other things, but language is important, and I think that's worth addressing. Like, what would we call it to? As soon as you hit the ground, you're not like worker owned, like. Um, So is co-management the decentralization of the management structure to create less dysfunction in the org? Oh, I see. Yeah, I feel like we're speaking on that.
Yeah,
Thank
yeah.
you, Sierra.
And thank you for that comment, Sierra. And I think what we've also seen is that in that work relationship thing, right? Like you've experienced this, I'm sure, many times. People come in and they don't really know how to be owners
Mm-hmm.
because all they've had is this worker mindset.
Yeah,
I'm an employee, right? And so tell me what to do,
yeah,
right? Like what do I do, right?
yeah. And there's like education, right? That helps with confidence. Like I know how to read books. I know I practice strategy. I know how to facilitate meetings now. Like there's a growth that builds confidence. I think that's a great, I mean, that's a big key.
Of
And then
course,
at some level, there's another limit that I think people will, that I reached, that's like, this is where the personal work starts happening. And it's like, okay, yeah, I think it's why I'm enjoying being an owner. It's like now my path is a part of my work too. And like I'm growing in each project that I decide or co-decide to take on. And it's like this is where I'm being called to, and I can meet that edge and like grow and then grow over here.
Yeah,
And I feel like as humans, we have that need. Like we want to find meaning. We want to grow. We want to explore what our body is calling us to, and learning how to mm, tune into that intuition of like what meeting the moment with what it needs is different for each of us. And this path of ownership, I think it allows us to be more human. It allows us to focus on that intuition and be like, what is needed
exactly.
from this room, from me in this moment. And at work we practice, but it's a movement, right? At work we practice, but in our city we practice, in our families. And then again, like maybe I mean, not maybe, we're setting up systems that we can fall back on when it's time. We're preparing,
Yeah,
we're training ourselves.
exactly. Actually, we call what you've just described, we call radical purpose. The reason we
Radical.
call it radical is not just this idea of transformation, right? Like radical is about transforming something, changing something in a radical way. But that radical is really means the root. And the
Hmm.
root of humanity is the needs you've just described.
Right. Yeah.
And if we don't think of the root of who we are, the root of what desires we have, these intuitions we have, these feelings we have, then we're always creating systems that negate those feelings because that's not part of what we're deciding about,
Hmm.
right? I have this intuition that we shouldn't go down this direction. I don't know why I have this intuition, but we should talk about it,
Hmm.
right? We should understand it. We should have this open conversation. Like instead of me saying, wow, I have no idea what the hell this person is going, it just doesn't feel right. But I can't say that because that intuition is something we can have a conversation about in business.
Yeah. Yeah. I recently experienced something like that. Like there was an owner contemplating leaving. And I've been a part of organizations where I just ghosted, right? I'm like, I'm leaving. I don't have to explain myself. I've tried to change it. It didn't work. So I'm just going to leave.
Right.
And it was sudden, bad for the organization, bad for me, bad for relationships. But in this situation, like we were able to discuss it over months. What are you feeling? How does, this business is you're an owner, you're this business. Like tell me what's happening. And we were able to kind of digest that part of their life openly. Money, personal life, meaning. And I think one thing that I get worried about, and I think many people do, is like not knowing, right? Our culture is like, if you know, you're smart, and then you get. So living in the unknown, being with the unknown, figuring it out together, working on ownership and what it means to own, um, help.
And seeing each other's needs and understanding each other's needs and talking about each other's needs.
Mm,
You've mentioned, meaning, belonging, impacting, becoming. All of those needs are there
mm,
for us. They're there as a fact of our biological selves. And if we're not talking about those things and we're not figuring out how to serve those things for ourselves and for each other, this decentralized thing isn't just at the organizational level, at the structure of the organization or at the ownership of the organization or the structure of how we govern. It's at the human level.
Mhm.
It's recognizing that what we're here for is to help each other move forward together. It's not just for business, right?
Yeah.
It's a recognition that we are here to help each other.
Yeah. Yeah, and that the siloing that happens when you're not being open and have a space that's cultivated that you can express that is very lonely, you
Yeah,
know? Like life can be very lonely. And so being around people where like I can show up and say, today's a shitty day, and they're like, all right, and they might be like, do you want to meet later? Or they might be like, let's do this while we don't feel so good. And so being able to, allow the mask down and be able to just show up in the space over and over again, it creates a sense of like, and seeing others do that too. It just is like, hey, this is normal. I'm normal and my life is like, so it creates a sense of safety. And for me, that's how good work gets done too. If you're
yeah,
looking at business, it's like we can do the best business and tune in the most to the needs of the community and each other. This business is for us and the community. The better work we're going to do.
yeah,
So, like, invite that
for
and learn
sure,
how
for
to.
sure. And I just put on the lens of someone working in an organization, a traditional organization with a traditional job. And
Yeah.
I've heard this. If I've heard it once, I've heard it 1,000 times. Yeah, well, how can people waste so much time talking about their personal lives? Right? Like
Yeah.
that's not like that just doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And what happens is when you open that door, yeah, at first there's a bunch of conversations like yeah, I'm feeling this way. I'm this and then after a while you don't need to talk about it. After
Hmm.
a while you sense it from each other. You give each other permission to sense it, to come in touch with that and be okay with it and reflect it and just all of that type of thing that we as human beings we do in safe environments.
Hmm.
It's the fact that we're not in a safe environment in an organization. We haven't built up the patterns of behavior that become habitual once you've done it. And after a while, it just goes smoothly. It doesn't, there isn't this, you're not talking about these things forever, right? In
Yeah.
fact, you clean up so much stuff after a while that it just feels like you're living in a community that gets you, that understands you.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Um, yeah, for all of those watching who wonder that, I'm like, um, save money on turnover,
Yeah.
save money, burnout is maybe less, the, the training is probably smoother, um, maybe the creativity is smoother too, so the idea comes to fruition faster, team dynamics are smoother, so like you'll save money. That's my theory. I'm sure there's research out there that supports that.
Yeah.
Uh, and it is a balance. Like not all containers can hold the personal works. I think the community should support that person in figuring that out, but maybe it's not this circle. Like maybe you get one-on-one support because we care about you, but like we can't hold that here right now. We have to do this. And so I think that's a conversation between each community.
Everything's
Uh,
dynamic.
yeah,
Nothing is fixed. It's not like all the time this could happen, all the time
yeah,
that can't happen. No, it's
right.
dynamic, and everybody understands that it's a dynamic process.
Hmm. And you could bring it up, right? Like if you have built the right structures, you can say, hey, are we sure we should talk about that right now? Can we go one on one while they keep talking so that we can digest this? And like those are the kind of um, we haven't talked too much about what structures would work well, but like in building, in prioritizing the open kind of structures, you allow for these kinds of opennesses and um, managing unknowns that can really be healthy for people and in their organization.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so tell me a little bit more about your organizations. You're working, I think you're a co-owner at two organizations, is that correct?
Yeah, I'm working. So, Dorchester Art Project is a own organization. It has a long history. Um, yeah, it has a long history. So, Dorchester Art Project has been a thing for a while, led by many great artists here in Boston. Um, and so, please visit the website and learn about the history. But I'll talk about 2 or 3 years ago, Amias McKnight, who's also a worker owner, like I think a solution here. The artists were having problems with the ED exploitation, white ED, and then the artists in Dorchester, and they were like, "This isn't working." So it was a big conflict for a long time. I'm totally like skipping over this, but it's a big deal.
Yeah.
And Amias was like, "Hey, why don't we make this a co-op?" And so that's when that process started. But just to say, at the moment, there are 6 of us, and, we meet weekly. We have such a great dynamic that it's almost hard to talk about structures because we just meet, and then we start moving, and each of us has different like departments that we work on, and then we come together and talk about those departments. So it naturally took on a sociocracy type model, and now we're talking about it formally, like, okay, since we're going to be bringing people on, how can we formalize this so that people can come in a little easier now that we've naturally built certain dynamics. But to say our mission is to build pipelines for artists to be able to be artists in the city in terms of like getting appropriate finances and opportunities and visibility. So creating those pipelines for artists in Dorchester, aside from like these artists that you see in Boston that may not be like of the community always. We're acquiring a space, like space for artists to create their work, an event venue, and then advocacy for artists through the city. So that's a little bit about Dorchester
And that sounds like
Project.
it's going well.
It's going really well. We have the people on the team are like superstars. They've been in Boston for a long time. They are some of them are artists or music producers or like nonprofit mavens, and so the team is so strong that the network was strong fast, and that is what I'll say is the key, is like we were plugged in all the right places, so we've had a lot of support, in addition to, Dorchester Art Project has been happening for over a decade as a project, and so those people built a name for Dorchester Art Project. So we're kind of just rearranging the structure and maybe and putting it here, and then who knows what happens next, right? But right now, it's artist organizers are the owners, but we've created a path for the artists themselves to become owners. So as soon as we start working more with the artists, um, they'll be able to become owners too. And so now this is an artist-led organization. So year 3, we're still in startup mode. I'd say we're incorporating January 1st, and yeah, we got a lot. It's gonna boom in 2025, so I'm
Nice,
excited
nice.
about it.
And the other project?
The other project is Colmenar Consulting Cooperative. So we do education, technical assistance. We support startup co-ops, um, you know, from building a team to launching the business. We also will do like I personally I've been focusing a lot on conflict resolution, communication, governance, decision making. And so folks might call us in to do some education with their team or with their co-op developers. So yeah, technical assistance, education, and really just keeping a finger on the pulse of the ecosystem to try to advocate or create what's needed. Colmenar was started about 5 years ago, and mm, the call was to create bilingual Spanish and English resources and support for immigrant communities. And so that was the launch of it, and it still has that heart. But we are also, we're transforming, we're adapting
Yeah,
with
yeah.
what comes our way.
Everything's dynamic. Yeah.
Yeah.
That
So
sounds cool because I mean, as I've seen, the vast majority of co-ops in the United States are Hispanic,
yeah, absolutely.
and it seems to me that there is a culture in the the Hispanic community that makes for that to be easier somehow. I don't know exactly what it is, that if it's the upbringing, if it's their places of origin, I'm not sure what
Mm,
it is, but there is this um, welcomingness to this uh, view of the world that is collaborative, cooperative. Does
yeah,
that does that resonate to you at all?
sure. Yeah. My family is Cuban and Chilean. I grew up more with the Chilean side of the family. Um, yeah, you're always having family over. One element there, and this might be a controversial topic, but it's also like there's also a need for help. Like you need
Right.
to work to bring money into the family. You need to help with dinner because I got home from my second job. So like there's a purpose of being close. I need to bring this to the pot so that we can all eat, right? And so I think this kind of it almost forces us also. It forces my family to collaborate.
Right.
Hey, we got to get it done. Like there's a pressure. Um, in addition to like greater culture of having more collectivism and parties, socialness, and yeah, and I think it's different in white culture.
Right. There's a different level of interdependence.
Yes,
Right.
yes. From like a social, relational way, but also like a need way,
Economic way. Yeah.
an
Yeah.
economic way. Yes, exactly.
Um, Adrian, I've enjoyed this conversation. We could go for quite a long time. Um, my cold is getting worse, it seems, as we speak, and I need to run up to go do some other things. But um, is there something you wanted to say that you haven't said about cultivating cooperative cultures?
Hmm. I just feel a lot of gratitude. Like there are a lot of people who are moving the co-op culture in a really great way. Like I was just listening to Kali Akuno's podcast before this, and it's Jessica Gordon Nemhart, Esther West, whose research you mentioned earlier.
Mhm.
Uh, so there are some really great folks in the movement, and just gratitude, that I think things are moving in a good direction. Um, and I'm always excited to be talking and learning from what comes out of my mouth and dialogues. I appreciate you.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate the work you're doing because I know that this co-op space is a difficult space because it's so niche, right? And just about everybody you talk to, you're having to sort of like totally explain what it is that you're doing and what
Mm.
you're talking about. People have heard of it a little bit, sort of in the background, but they don't really know. And even in people who are starting the process of becoming co-ops, it's a big hurdle. And part of what we're hoping to do is one, uh, have some new ideas for the co-op space, but also find ways to make it easier for
Mm.
people to shift over into a cooperative or collaborative mindset, because um, the desire is there. It's just that they don't have the language, they don't have the practices, they don't have the community, doesn't have a shared view of what this thing could be. And
Right.
so the more we can do that collaboratively, the more I think we will see. And my sense is we're right on the tipping point
Yeah.
for the emergence of a new type of cooperative, collaborative community of work,
Yeah.
that is a huge potential.
Yeah. One more thing I that's coming to mind was like collaboratively, um, drawing on from what I understand Kali Okuno to be saying. It's you know, funders out there, like this, you too might need to fall on systems like this. And so it would be wise to start thinking like philanthropy and funders, like how can you support these movements too, which you might need pretty soon. And
Yeah.
so some cities are thinking about that. But so that would be my call to action is like, fund these practices.
Well, and we've actually been working with some folks in Africa and Canada, who have been piloting some community currencies and community investment models that are touching upon all of that,
Mm,
because much of the type of funding that we have today is also centralized,
yeah.
right? So we build a fund, the fund gets to decide who gets
Right,
it,
right.
right? Like
Yeah.
we're back in the same old game. And if we don't decentralize the whole thing, then we have a weak point,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So
Shout
the
out to Ujima Boston. They do a good job of that. Decentralizing funds,
yeah,
community investment programs, for sure. I
yeah.
love
And
that.
so that's the work I think we all mutually have to start working on, is how do we fund ourselves, right?
Absolutely.
Like not wait for the big powers with the centralized money to do this, but how do we fund ourselves? And some of those folks that would then typically be investing in funds, um,
Mhm.
will want to move some of that money into a decentralized loan. But that's a new thing, what we're calling co-investment, uh, right?
Yeah,
Because
I
we
like.
need co-ownership, co-management, and co-investment.
Yeah.
These things of decentralized need to work together, and when you bring in one of the pieces that isn't collaborative in its structure, um, causes the other pieces to fall apart. It
Mm,
just puts too much stress on the other pieces.
yeah.
So that we think is sort of a model moving forward for us to be able to, as a broader community of co-ops and collaboratives and a co-investment community, being able to do this.
Mm. Radical world. I
It's
love
a
the name.
radical world, my friend.
Good to see you again. I'm sure we'll talk again soon.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
I'm just
Just
happy
happy.
happy holidays to you
You
in the
too.
new year, and we'll be talking to our audience in the new year too, because we're done for the year
Oh,
20
nice.
2024. We'll see you folks in the new year. Keep an eye on our upcoming section on the websites, Radical World, radical.world, and Radical World Live. Both of those sites will lead you to the same place. Keep an eye out for what's coming, and we'll see you in 2025. Adrian, real pleasure. I expected it to be, and it was. So thank you so much, and we'll talk to you in the new year.
All right, take it easy.
Cheers.